Welcome back to this episode 202. This time, we're going to return to the topic of play. I just did a series of interviews with other people when I had conversations about what is play. And since these conversations became lively, energetic, relating play to the adult experience, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. It's so good to be back, and I look at that number 202 and I realize, I didn't tell you who won and what happened as a result of the 200 celebration. I did not get the 4 people in the program that I was hoping for, and there's a couple spots left if that interests you. I could be persuaded to keep that sale going a little bit longer if that interests you. A couple books and the Starbucks gift card were chosen. And for the people that got books, I asked you for your mailing address in an email that I sent you. So if you or somebody that sent me that number 200 in honor of the 200th episode, and you chose a book, I did email you back, and I'm asking for your postal address, and I will be so delighted to send it to you, but I do need to have an address to send it to. So maybe this will remind you. Thank you to everybody that decided to play with me for celebrating 200 episodes. Just yesterday, I participated in Podapalooza, which is an event where a bunch of podcasters get together. They share information with speakers that are speaking on the topics that we like to hear. And I got to be the speaker on a number of stages. And I just wanted to say to you that I got to speak on Deborah Greenhut's podcast she has now. It's called The Sharegiving Secret, How to Survive Family Caregiving. And she spoke to us on episode 126 about children having imaginary friends. So I'll link that in the show notes. And then I also got to be on Melissa Deely's podcast again, and I will link that in the show notes too. You might remember Melissa Deely from episodes 65 and 66. You might remember Melissa Deely for being an integrative health practitioner, and she talked with us about how food impacts behavior and learning, and how to recognize food reactions, make right choices for kids, and detect food sensitivities. Both of these beautiful women and fabulous past guests had podcasts that they were having speakers at Podapalooza, and I got to visit their shows. Again for Melissa and for the first time for Deborah. Eventually those will be published, and I'll let you know in the newsletter when they come out. I have a free gift that is complete now, and that is titled 5 Ways to Get Your Kids to Listen Better. I created it and had several tech hiccups. Imagine that. And then now I think it is perfectly done and it is ready. So check the show notes if you would like to get that free gift titled 5 Ways to Get Your Kids to Listen Better. Now let's get into the content where we talk about play. The topic that kept coming up in these conversations was the quote from Brian Sutton Smith and from Stuart Brown. I'm not sure who said it first. The opposite of play is not work, which is what so many of us think. But rather, the opposite of play is depression. So we unpacked this topic, and I want to consider the various aspects of this sentence because over time I have come to really understand it deeply. And the more I understand it, the more I realize that there's a deep embedded truth in this. First, the opposite of play. Now, many of us grow up thinking that we play after we get done working. I know that that's how I grew up. And I have learned that that is part of the conditioning that, for example, my parents had, which would be behaviorist scientists such as Skinner and Watson and others, who basically believe that we can reinforce the behavior we do want by giving rewards, and we can reduce the behavior we don't want by giving punishment. Now, obviously, I am summarizing simply what is a bit more complex. Basically, it's reinforcing the behaviors you want to be repeated and punishing behaviors you want to decrease. This type of thinking is how many of us grew up. The problem with this is that we are relational beings. The problem with this is that the outcome over time is that you have a generation of people where there's so much self-doubt, so much doubt of worth and value, that relating to others ends up in being people-pleasing and all of these things we do to try to validate ourselves. So now let's return to that concept we talked about a moment ago, which was the opposite of play. Now, if the opposite of play is work, it kind of yields this idea that we can't really enjoy our work. But yet we do know that when you do something you really love, it can still be work, but it doesn't feel like work. So what is the difference between the word work, as used twice in that same sentence? So the first time work is being used, it is what you do. And the second time work is used, I'm going to use the synonym toil. And now listen to it again. And I'll use a Steve Jobs quote. If you love the work you do, you will never work a day in your life. So if you love doing the thing you do, you will never toil a day in your life, would be the translation. Now, I want to suggest that many of us have this idea that this toil for work is what qualifies as working. And there's this attitude that many of maybe your grandparents and parents, and maybe you too, grew up with, thinking that you have to keep doing the do until you finish, and at that time you have earned the right to be able to have playtime or free time. That doing the work is first and the play is second. But what if Steve Jobs was right? If that's the case, can we make our parenting so that it's not toil? Can we make the work of parenting become something that we love to do, so much so that it isn't toil? I believe the reason we do that is so that we don't end up so overworked that we end up in that state of depression. And how do you break free from some of that? And I'm not talking clinical depression here because I'm not an expert in that field. But I am talking about that depression that happens when we get so fatigued that we are burned out and we just feel depressed. What is the antidote for that? Well, the antidote for that is going to be to play. This leads us to the next question. What does play look like for you, moms and dads? I will suggest that we come back to the same words I've been using on this podcast from the start. let's define play. Imagine for a minute, well, this probably won't be hard for many of you, but imagine for a minute that you're in that space of you're burned out, you're tired, you have been repeating yourself, the kids are not doing what it is that you want them to do, and how can you find play in your mind? I want you to consider what it would be like for you if you were to be able to go explore something, if you were to learn something new, if you were to be able to put your mind on something else and start discovering, if you were to find enjoyment, if you were to find fun, if you were to be doing something and being engaged in the process with curiosity, if you felt a sense of awe and challenge in the new thing that you're doing. Maybe you're learning something new. Now, if you were in that space in your mind, that would qualify as play. Because what we're doing is we're separating ourselves from the stressor, and that doesn't mean from your child. It really means from your interpretation of what's going on with your child. So it's really the mental game of being able to switch how we're thinking about our situation and become curious, become challenged, become in an exploratory mindset. Can we become engrossed in the next thing that we're doing? And when we can release ourselves from what we were thinking about, so we switch our mind entirely to think about something else, that process brings us into one way to think about play. Play is multiple things, but this is one way to think about play. And in this way, it is a mindset. It is a way to change your thinking patterns that releases you from the work of doing and puts you into a space where you are playing, because the work, the toil of the work can cause you depression, whereas the play can be ongoing and you can jump from one thing to the next thing, and it keeps your mind more at rest while you're doing what you need to do. Sounds easy. I know it isn't. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. I hope I described that well to you, and I hope that somebody emails me with a challenge to the thinking. I would love to know who is resonating with this and who thinks, no, that doesn't sound right. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com. Let me know what your thoughts are. This episode is short, and it's also a thinker. And that was the topic of multiple robust conversations that I look forward to sharing with you in the future when those podcasters publish the episodes. Some of them are scheduled months out, so don't expect it really soon. And I hope you had a beautiful Valentine's Day. I spent it with my grandchildren and entirely forgot to acknowledge Valentine's Day here on the Language of Play. I was so busy playing. I hope you were playing too. Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.